What's up? Rafi here, and today's video I'm gonna be playing a couple of chess puzzles on Lichess, solving some puzzles rather. So I'm gonna go ahead and take you through the thought process for how I go about solving these puzzles, and hopefully you guys will be able to use the same method in your calculation to improve your calculation method as well and become better calculators and see deeper into positions and not be lazy like I used to be. So here we go. So when I'm evaluating the position, the first thing I look at is just a general material count to see where I stand. In this particular position, I noticed that materially it seems like it's pretty even. Black is definitely down a couple of pawns, but as far as pieces are concerned, it's pretty even. So black is obviously needs to either get some material back with a better position, or he needs to play for the checkmate here. So already, I need to be aware of the fact that I'm down material as far as pawns are concerned here. So what are the forcing moves here? Obviously, there's the first things to consider would be the checks. So there's a check obviously possible on g2. That's the first thing I would consider. The next thing I want to look at is forcing moves and captures. So captures, I don't see a whole lot of captures except for on g2. Then there's a capture available on b3 as well with the rook. And so, g2 is definitely a capture that I'm going to consider further, but taking the pawn on b3 really makes no sense. The next thing we want to look at is forcing moves. So if there's any move that I can play that forces my opponent to respond to it, that's considered a forcing move. So if I play something, he has to do X. So if I play X, he has to do Y. That's considered a forcing move. In this case, a forcing move to consider would be something like either bishop takes g2, queen takes g2, rook to d8, either rook to d8 or the move rook to e2. All force some sort of a sequence because rook to e2 attacks the bishop, rook to d8 attacks the queen, bishop takes g2 threatens to checkmate next move with bishop to f3. Queen takes g2 obviously is a check, and also that has to be addressed right away. These are all forcing moves to consider. So let's consider the most obvious one here. Queen takes g2. So if I play queen takes g2, that's check. Queen will take back. Bishop takes, king takes, and I'm down material, and I don't see anything concrete coming out of that. Queen takes g2. Queen takes g2. Is there any in-between moves I can play? Don't see anything. All right. What about bishop takes g2? He pretty much has to address it because my threat is to play bishop f3 followed by queen g2 mate. So, in fact, bishop g2 f3 is checkmate. So after bishop takes g2, he has to pretty much play queen takes g2. And after that, do I have any in-between moves after that that can be forcing? No, don't see anything in particular. Okay, so what else is there to consider now? Now let's look at rook to d8. So if I play this rook from b to d8, that attacks the queen has to keep in touch with the pawn on g2. So after that, he can go to f3. And after queen to f3, do I have any forcing moves? Do I have any forcing moves after queen to f3? I don't see anything in particular. Queen also has b7 to go to after rook from b to d8. So there's that option as well available to him. But I'm not seeing anything concrete after either queen f3 or queen to b7. They both seem to be playable moves for white. So let's look at the next option that we have available here. By the way, rook from e to d8 kind of has a similar scenario where he can still go to f3 in that case. And after queen to f3, you want to kind of keep the same process in the sub variations also. Then you want to again look for checks, captures, and forcing moves after after you first see the first move. You want to keep rinsing and repeating that same process over and over. So queen f3, is there any checks? Yeah, still the same checks and captures and things like that available. And still, I don't see any forcing moves after queen to f3. Bishop to g4 does come to mind, which attacks the queen, but I believe the queen can just go to g3. Next forcing move that comes to mind is rook to e2. That attacks this bishop. The bishop has kind of limited squares to go to. It can go to d1 or b1. And if it goes to either square, it's attacking our rook, and I don't see any particular winning moves either. One thing that comes to mind is somehow being able to interfere with the defense of the queen to the g2 square. So if I can somehow put something here or here, I definitely would love to be able to play a move like rook to d5, cutting off the defense, of the queen to the g2 pawn. But here, if I play some move like that, I believe my opponent could simply capture with the queen. And if I take back, he takes back, and I'm not really sure what I'm gaining from that exchange either. So I'm not so sure if that move works. Pretty tricky one. After quite some time, I'm still not really seeing the winning idea here. I've considered a move like rook to e5. He can't capture because I have queen takes g2 checkmate, so he can still, though, he can play queen to f3 in that position. And after queen to f3, could I do something there? Maybe then I can take it. Okay, now we're onto something here. Okay, let's look at this line. This is forcing. So rook to e5 threatens the queen. Queen cannot capture. Queen has to stay on this diagonal to protect g2. So pretty much c6 is taken from the queen, b7 is taken, a8 is taken, this square is taken, so queen f3 is forced. Okay, so then what if I take on g2? Queen takes back on g2, then I can swing the rook over to g5, and I'm pinning the queen to the rook. To the king. And I believe that should win the game for us. So let's go forward this line. Boom. Now I'm just making sure rook g5 first is not the idea. No, it's not. So it's boom. And yeah, so if he takes back here, my move is this, and now we're winning the queen. So this was a very nice one, very tricky one for sure. So I'm glad we were able to walk through that process of finding the forcing moves. Notice how we look at the forcing moves, which were basically moves that threaten to capture a piece, which in this case, rook to e5 is a very forcing move because it threatens to capture the queen, and the queen has very, very limited squares it could have gone to. And it was the only square was f3, and after which we basically, now that the rook has gained, came onto on the fifth rank with tempo, rook is able to slide over to the g file now. And so now the idea of taking on g2 with the bishop definitely works. And he's forced to play a move like this. And this is obviously winning for us. We're winning the exchange. And we have a very good position here as well, if this were to play out on the board. So here, let's go to the next one. Okay, so my opponent just played h5 here. Let's go through the same process again. So the process is going to be looking for the checks, captures, and forcing moves. So there's a check here. It's the first thing to consider. We also want to consider the material real fast here. So queen and two minor pieces versus queen, a minor piece, and a rook. We have 4 pawns, and white has 4 pawns. We're basically down in exchange here. He has the rook for our bishop. But we've got a pretty nice looking attack. This bishop in particular is very, very powerful. But if we don't get something quick going here, we're definitely going to lose this game because white has a very simple threat of playing h6, and really putting a lot of pressure on the f8 bishop, and maybe swinging this rook to a8 at some point, or maybe somewhere on this diagonal, or sorry, the 8th rank here, and easily winning the game here. So we've got to find something very forcing here. So queen to c1 check is the first move to consider. And after that check, white has a couple of responses. He can play knight to f1, or he can play king to h1, h2. So let's look at knight to f1. If he just blocks the check, do we have anything in that position? I just realized there's another move to consider. Why not threaten a checkmate by playing queen to d5? We're threatening a mate on g2. How's he stopping that checkmate threat? Let's see. His only move seems to be f3. And if he plays that, then we can probably play. Let's see, Queen d5, f3. I'm trying to find some way to fork this king and this rook somehow, because this rook is undefended, so that's definitely a target that I want to consider ganging up on. But right now, for the time being, I'm not able to see the next follow-up move. After Queen d5, f3, where can I go to attack? Okay, I got it. I see it now. Wait, maybe I do. Let's see. Queen d5, f3. If I play a check up here, if he goes to f2, I have check here. I'm picking up the rook. And if he plays king h2, Queen d5, f3. Is there any move that I can play that attacks this knight and this rook also at the same time? I don't see anything. Queen d5, f3. Queen d5, f3. Queen e d1 check. King h2. Queen e1. That attacks the rook. Okay, Queen d5, f3. What if then I play Queen d2? There we go. That's hitting the rook, but it doesn't threaten a checkmate anymore because the pawn is now on f3. In order to hit the king and the rook, my queen needs to somehow... This is tricky. Tricky stuff here. I'm still pretty convinced that Queen d5 is probably the best move. It's probably the right idea here, but I'm not sure if I'm getting, if I've, I'm not seeing all of it yet. After Queen d5, if he plays f3, then where's my follow-up? Maybe I play... I don't know. Maybe I play first queen here. But if he moves his rook away, say he moves to rook to c6 or a6, I play a check here. He can then play a knight to f1 again, defending everything. Yeah, this one is definitely has some tricks to it. Queen d5, f3. Checks. Okay, after Queen d5, my checks are here. Here. So this check, he hides to h2. And I can't take this either, because knight's defending. Queen d5, f3. What about this check right here? Check. He again has to h2. But in this case, I can play check here. Queen back to g1. And I can win this knight. That looks pretty good. Okay, so queen d5, f3, queen d4 check. We know that if he goes to h2, I have this check and I'm winning the knight. But what if he goes to f1? Maybe in that case, I could play check here, which forces him to go to f2. And then I can play check here and I can win the rook. Yeah, so queen d5, f3, queen d4 check. If king h2, then I have check here, winning the knight. And if king f1, then I have check. King f2 is forced, then I have queen d2 check. Knight blocks or king moves, I'm putting the rook next move. Alright, so I see it now. So now we throw this check. And if he goes there, then we throw this check. And if he goes here, then we had this check. And we're winning the rook. And another variation that we looked at, just to play it out on the board, queen d5, f3, check. If he goes here, then we have this check, and we're winning this knight. Either way, we're getting some material out of this, so we can take this pawn, but it's pretty winning for black now. Probably play a check here. Yeah, and probably just take this pawn, and I'm up a whole bishop now, basically for no good compensation. So yeah, that was a tricky one. So, but we figured it out for sure. All right, let's move on to the next one. All right, so again, same process. The first thing we do is what? The first thing we do is look for all the checks, all the captures, and all the forcing moves. So what are the checks in the position? Ask yourself. Well, you know that bishop takes f7 is a check. You know that bishop takes c6 is a check. What are the captures in the position? Again, bishop takes f7, bishop takes c6 are both captures. There's also a capture possible on d6. E takes d6. Okay, so let's look at the forcing moves. Are there any forcing moves? Bishop takes f7 is definitely a forcing move. It forces the king to come out to f7, or go to f8 or d7. But if we can get away with playing a move like bishop to f7 and he has to move to f8 or d7, we know we've gotten just a free pawn and he can't do anything to us. And as far as material, we seem to be pretty even. 2 bishops for 2 bishops, 2 majors for 2 majors. Black has 6 pawns, white has 6 pawns each. So we know it's pretty even materially. So one thing that does come to my mind is that after a move like e takes d6, the bishop is pinned. Yes, the queen can take back on d6, but then we have this discovered check on f7. So that's interesting. After e takes d6, this is pinned, so we're threatening to capture this piece. So after e takes d6, queen takes d6, we can play also bishop takes c6 check. And if the thing is that he can play queen takes c6 there. What if we start with bishop takes c6 check? b takes, then e takes d6. Winning this bishop, because if queen takes, then I can take back with the queen, and the bishop can't take back because it's pinned. So I think this is the way to go. Bishop takes c6, b takes c6, then e takes d6. Bishop can't capture. Queen captures, can't capture because queen takes. So if he castles or something, I can take the bishop on e7. So yeah, this is the way to go here. I'm taking this one. The thing is that he can't take this way because I'm taking his queen, and the bishop is pinned from the rook. And can't take with the bishop, of course, either. And if he doesn't take my bishop, then I simply retreat my bishop, and I've just gotten a free piece. So yeah, so after this move, he has to take, and the best he probably has is just to castle, or maybe some move like computer suggesting h5, which obviously loses speaking to this move. And yeah, it's really bad. If he goes here or something like that, I'm getting all my pieces out and have a great position. All right, next one. So again, same method. The first thing we look for is the checks. The second thing we look for is the captures. The third thing we look for are the forcing moves. And if you see a forcing line where you know that you can calculate and there's forcing moves coming and you can see another forcing move, you know you need to continue to calculate deeper. As long as there's a forcing move which forces a response from your opponent, you always want to continue to calculate deeper into those lines and variations. You don't want to stop calculating a line until you run out of forcing moves. When you know there's no more forcing moves and he has a multitude of moves that are all good, that don't seem to be forced, then you can stop calculation and decide if you like that position or not. But as long as you're seeing a forcing moves, you need to go ahead and start calculating those lines right away. So let's start with the checks here in the position. We've got a check on f8. We've got a check on g8. We have a check on the queen on h8. 3 possible checks. We've got a capture on e7 and a check also on e7. These are all the captures that I can see. These are all the checks I can see in the position. So let's look at each of these checks first of all. The one that quickly jumps to my mind is queen to f8 check. After which the king can go to c7, only move. And okay, we forgot to do one more thing. We forgot to do a material count here. So black has queen, a major piece, and a minor piece. White has a queen and a major piece, doesn't have a minor piece. White has 6 pawns to black's 5 pawns. So white is basically down a minor piece for just a pawn that he has. So white's definitely a down material, so white needs to do something very, very quick and very creative to be able to win this game. Move that jumps onto my mind is also rook to e5, which does attack the queen on the g5 square. And notice that also the knight can't really move from e7 because there's a checkmate threat on d7. So the knight is somewhat like stuck to that e7 square in some ways. So after queen to e5, rook e5, for example, there is no knight f5 because there's queen to d7 checkmate. But after rook to e5, there might be queen to c1 check, king to h2, queen to f4 check. And that might not be so fun. But again, we don't want to allow the initiative to go to black by any means. If there's a forced way to win and calculate the win, that's what we need to be doing. The reason I'm calculating a move like rook to e5 is because then I can play queen to f8 check, and after king to c7, I can take the knight on e7 if his queen has to give up defense of the knight. That is the reason why I'm looking at that line intensely. Queen f8 check, king to c7. Are there any checks and captures and things like that in that position? After king c7, that's what I have to calculate now. Hmm. Not really seeing anything in particular after king to c7. Seems like all the good checks have run out. So I'm going to go back and start calculating this rook to e5 line one more time. Rook to e5, queen to c1 check, or rook to c1 check, in fact. Either way, I'm going to h2. Let's say queen c1, h2. Queen f4 check. Let's say I play g3. H takes g3 check. King g2. And I believe white is running out of checks after that. I'm not seeing the next check from white. And in the meantime, I am threatening to play rook takes d5. Because again, the knight can't really capture back because it's checkmate on d7. So rook takes d5 looks really good. But also I'm threatening to play queen f8 check followed by queen takes e7 check. When my position looks really good. So those moves look really, really strong to me. It's also worth considering throwing the check on h8 first, and then playing rook to e5, if that makes any difference at all. I don't think it does. I think it makes it a little bit worse than the other variation of where we play the rook to e5 right away, but it's definitely something worth considering. But in this position, I just don't think that it does anything to throw the check on h8 first and get the queen on the first rank with tempo. Okay, here's another thing to consider. Queen f8 check, king c7, then what about queen to e8? Is that something to consider? Because I'm threatening to come into d7 with a check. Don't think that does a whole lot, by the way. Because I feel like I don't really have a concrete threat. Even if I get to play queen to d7, he can just go to b8. If queen d8 check, then he has rook to f8, rook to c8. I mean, and he is simply blocking everything. If queen d6 check, king to a8, and I'm not really sure what I'm accomplishing there. So rook to e5 definitely seems like the right idea here. The other thing to consider is a move like f4. But I don't believe f4 makes any sense. Well, f4 does make some sense because it does allow me to play. If queen takes f4, then I can play rook to f1. Seems pretty strong, but I don't know if it's enough. Rook to e5, queen to c1. Rook to e5, rook to c1, king h2, queen f4. g3. H takes g3, king g2. And I feel like my threat of playing queen to f8 is pretty strong in that line. That I feel like can he stop that though? Can he play something like, you know, I just realized queen f4 stops me from playing queen f8. Hmm. That's interesting. So if rook e5, let's say queen c1, king h2, queen f4, g3, h takes g3, king g2. Say he plays whatever move like a6. I can't really play queen to f8 in that position because he has queen takes f8. Because his queen is now on f4, which is guarding f8. So that doesn't really make sense. But in that position, I am able to play rook takes d5 check. But after king to c7, again, I'm not really... Well, I guess I do see a follow-up. Rook to d7 is the follow-up. But he can also play king to c8. But in that case, I believe I can play queen to h8 check. So basically, somehow I need to take on d5 with check. Which, the line that we just calculated, it is threatening to play rook takes d5 check. Okay. So let's look at this thing again. So rook e5, queen c1 or rook c1, king h2, queen f4, g3, oh, he also has queen takes f2 in that position. Didn't even calculate, I missed that completely. Queen can play queen takes f2, and that's basically checkmate. Wow, okay. Hmm. Yeah, this one is kind of tricky. I still feel like rook e5 seems right, but after queen c1 check, king h2, queen f4 check, I'm not seeing what my move should be. King h1, then it just repeats the position. In fact, I might even be losing after rook c1 in that position. Queen to f8 check, king to c7. I don't know. I'm not seeing this one at all. This one has been tricky for me. You guys are probably seeing this very quickly, and that's great if you can see this faster than I can. And it's pretty late at night, as you can see. It's 1:13, so I'm kind of a little tired also, which might be affecting my thought process here. Well, I think rook e5 may not be the right idea here. Let's look at f4. It's a possible idea here. 4 is very interesting. After f4, you can't really do anything to keep protecting the knight. That's interesting. After f4, he has to take. Oh, what if I check first, then I play f4? Ooh, that's interesting. Yeah, check first, king fc7, then f4. That might be it, because then he can't hold on to this knight. And his f4 is protected. Oh, I think I got it. Then knight on e7 is definitely falling after that. So let's go with this idea here, and playing f4 now. Okay, he's attacking this, but I believe we can take the knight with check first, and then move our rook away. We have to be careful because he has threats on g2. Let's take this one with check. Yeah, so after he moves, say, here or here, we simply can throw another check, check. And we can come here. Lots of checks. We can threaten the queen now, and yeah, so everything is protected and looks good. Anyway, so hopefully you guys understood the thought process. Just to reiterate again, when you're thinking about a position, the first thing you want to do is take a quick evaluation of the position, see where you stand materially and positionally. The next thing you want to do is quickly start looking at all the possible checks. Then you want to start looking at all the possible captures. Then you want to start looking at all the forcing moves. So with the forcing moves, you want to continue to maintain that structure of thinking on all the moves, on the sub variations also. So the first time you look at the position, then you're like, okay, this is checks, this is the capture, this is the forcing moves. After you find your opponent's best response, you have to still rinse and repeat the same process. So in this case, say, our first move here was going back was queen to f8, king c7. In this position, after I thought about this move, queen to f8 in my mind, I would need to imagine king c7, then again I have to go through the process. Okay, then do I have, what's my checks, captures, and forcing moves? When you see forcing moves, and you know there's only one response from your opponent, you have to continue to calculate as deeply as you can if there's a forcing move possible in any position. Okay, so always remember to do that process, and when you go into sub variations, always continue to keep doing the same process of looking for the checks, the captures, and then the forcing moves, and calculating the forcing moves all the way to the end. And you should definitely see your your calculating abilities in chess improving. The most important thing is not to be lazy, but actually to calculate these positions just like I'm showing you. And that's exactly how chess masters calculate, and soon enough you will become a master as well, and be able to calculate very well. Thank you, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will catch you guys in my next video. And leave in the comments below whatever you guys want to see.